Welcome back to part 4 of the Painting a Monster series. In this little series, we are doing some texture work on a creature we created in ZBrush. If you do not have this model, you can go through the ZBrush tutorial if you have ZBrush. And alternatively, you could just paint any model you can find online using the process or the steps we're going over in this tutorial. But to continue this tutorial, what we will do is add highlights to this. I actually might include, I think it makes sense to include a download to the texture file. I need to figure out a place to host it, or the texture file, the actual model, so that you can actually follow along. I think that would be good. That's probably a good idea. So I'll put a link in the description of the model, and I'll include the high and the low detail model as well, like an FPX of both. All right, so we're going to be adding highlights. So the first thing I want to do is under this inverted mask folder, create a new fill layer, and we'll just call it highlights. And what we want, we just want color and height. So for color, I'm going to change the color to kind of like yellow, like golden yellow, like that. And then for heights, we can do like 0.07. Okay, then we'll add a black mask. So right click on the fill layer you just created, go to black mask, add black mask. All right, so now we can paint on this. So what we'll do is we'll open up the shelf. And if you don't have the shelf, window, views, shelf. We'll go down to brushes and pick out a nice brush to add the highlights. So if you use a crazy brush, so if I just like go like this, if I use this brush and start painting with this, it's gonna be insane. That'll be too strong, as you can see there. So we want something, you can always modify it. You could reduce the flow and then it would be more reasonable. So that's actually not a bad option, but just be mindful of how intense your brush is. This actually isn't a bad brush to use for this. Let's try it. So what we did, artistic heavy sponge, and then put on pen pressure for size. Pen pressure for flow should be on. If not, you can click up here to turn it on. I turned the flow down to 9, so that if I paint with this, it's very subtle now, whereas before it was insane. So I want to add little highlight details in certain parts of the model. I don't want to add too many because then it'll look crazy. So I just want to add these to kind of accent certain sections of the model to kind of like have certain things appear more visible and have more color going on. More color to them. So I'm trying to add like little details in this. And you also want to try to paint the highlights on where you put the midtones, because that's kind of where, like in the previous video, we painted midtones, and that was in preparation for adding highlights so it blends better. Because otherwise it'll just look, like if I just paint highlights in here, it looks crazy. So you want to kind of transition between those two things. So here's like the effect of the highlights. It's this little subtle effect. But it adds a lot, and you don't, like, it'll probably be the shortest part for painting we've done so far. Make the brush larger. I don't want to use them too often. I just want to have like a few highlights in some key areas. That's kind of like the rule with highlights. You don't want a ton of them, I think. Maybe there's a use case where you have a ton of highlights and it makes sense, but I would say for most models you want to use them sparingly. All right, let's get rid of that last one. And we can do the same thing for shadows. So we can have like super dark shadows that are like a different color as well, and hit up certain areas of the model with those. But for this video, we're just going to focus on these like subtle highlights. Put some on like the lips. Let's see. Maybe some on the bottom of the nose, little bits. I can put some on the tongue, just like a very slight amount. You can always add more midtones too. That's always an option if you want to add more highlights. This isn't like a hard and fast rule. You can add highlights wherever you want. It's just you want it to look good, right? So you want to blend it if you can. Alright, so let's check this out really quick. I think the lip ones look kind of crazy. Like the upper lip ones. So let's go back to midtones. Gonna add some in. So it's kind of like a balancing act. Let's actually take away a little bit from that, and then take away a little bit from this. Just somewhat. And we can always decrease the strength of the highlights. They're known as extreme. So it's more subtle. Just to give you a little bit of color in there. Alright, so let's resume painting the highlights. So I'm just changing the grayscale, select the mask of the layer, the mask you want to select the mask you want to edit, and then with the brush tool selected, you can drag these around. So white adds, black subtracts. So I don't want to have too much on the back here, just like a little bit, just so that if you're viewing this from different angles, you can see some different highlights. And we can also have different highlight colors. Like it doesn't have to all be one color. You can have different parts of the model that have different colors for the highlights. And you also don't have to have just one base color either. Like these, I could make these crevices a different color and mask that out and paint it similar to how we did the shell. That would be totally fine. There's definitely some planning that goes into making very complicated 3D models. Alright, let's get some of these in here. Just want to get like some of the ridges. So that adds like some emphasis to the edges, which can look kind of cool. Especially the sharp edges, so like here. You don't have to do every single edge. I'm just going to do a few more. Maybe some around like the edge of the lips. Can add some more up here. The nice thing about working with masks and fill layers is that we can always change things pretty easily. So if we get a result we don't like, we can always edit it. So if I think that this color is too strong, or maybe I want to make it more orange, I can do that. I can also make it red. So if we just want to have it be slightly different, maybe even brighter and more orange. And try less orange. I can mix in white as well. Alright, so let's look at other areas where we might want to add it. Maybe a little bit here. We can start adding in like fine details in different spots. Maybe some along the top of the lip here as well. And the edges of the tongue. Sometimes you're better off just doing like a little stroke. So like instead of like painting in a ton, you can just do little subtle strokes like that. Because they'll still show through, but they won't be as prominent. And you can also increase the brush size and do little strokes as well. Like subtle strokes, because it adds just a little bit of extra detail that can make the model look a little bit nicer. Alright, let's get these here. And some of these inside parts. Brow ridge a little bit. Just subtly so. It's all a balancing act, I think. For painting, you have to kind of like balance the different ranges of color and shadow, as well as like detail and like height detail and stuff like that. So if something looks off, you can always adjust it. Alright, so here's the highlights so far. I'm just looking for parts that look bad that I should change. And the better you get, the better you'll be able to scrutinize and be more precise with like how you paint these things. Let's put a little bit here. Alright, I do want to address this area over here. Let's go back to the midtones. Just add a little bit. That's the nice thing about midtones. Midtones just really help break up repetitive areas pretty quickly. So it's very similar to the base fill, but it's just slightly different. So that you can add some more variety in terms of texture and in terms of color. I think that really helps. Alright. I think that looks good for now. So here's the highlights, before and after. It's always good to check to make sure the new stuff added doesn't look weird or bad and it looks like it blends in well. And I think so far it does. And we can always scrutinize it later and look for like weird areas as well. But I think that's good for now. I think that's good for the highlights. So it's just saving. So what I would like to do in the next video, we'll do kind of like an alternate shadow to break up the shadows a bit, and then we can also paint in a little bit more like micro detail in some sections. So for now we have, I would say this is like mostly complete for the inside part. We still have to completely do the egg outside. But now we have these 3 distinct layers for each section of the model that can be fully edited in terms of what appears, the color, the height, everything. So we can adjust that stuff as we go if needed. So yeah, that's it for this one. Definitely like and subscribe if you enjoyed this or found this useful. Drop a comment, let me know what you think, and I'll see you in the next section.